Hello, my name is Jillian Bateman, and this is my presentation, Mary Cassatt, The Recognition of the True Woman. It was the fall of 1861, and another year began at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in the city of Philadelphia. This would be the year that 17-year-old Mary Stevenson Cassatt would begin her artistic studies at the American Art School. After completing her studies at the Academy, Cassatt would go on to travel to Paris and then around Europe, to Italy and Spain. Eventually settling in Paris, Cassatt will be known for her involvement as an impressionist painter and later printmaker. Throughout her career, her work specializes in the subject of women and children. Although she did not have much choice in this subject matter as a respectable upper-class woman, she still sought to convey the depths of these subjects and even grow an understanding of these themes along the way. First, in Spanish Dancer, wearing a lace mantilla, the artist uses the pose of the dancer and the symbolism of the fan to indicate a separation between the audience and the exotic woman. These elements also serve to emphasize the feelings of the dancer herself. Cassatt's Woman with a Pearl Necklace at the Loge depicts a sitter with more life and exuberance. From her facial expression and posture, this woman seeks to see and to be seen by those around her. Finally, Woman Bathing is a print by the artist that depicts a woman bathing herself in the privacy of a bathroom. Being semi-nude, this subject is often regarded as sensuous. However, Cassatt's careful rendering communicates otherwise. All three of these works are examples of the artist's depiction of women. Within these works, not only is there a gradual understanding formally, stylistically, and conceptually, but Cassatt's views of womanhood also shift as she discovers what makes a true woman. To begin, Spanish Dancer wearing a lace mantilla was painted by Cassatt in 1873. This oil on canvas is a portrait of a native Spaniard woman. Cassatt would paint this work during a 6-month visit to Spain from October 1872 to April 1873. In letters to her friend Emily Sartain, the American painter and printmaker, Cassatt would speak of her growing aspiration to travel to Spain. Upon finally arriving in Spain, Cassatt settled in more so as a tourist. This allowed her to observe and take in the people, places, and art around her. This is exactly the view from which Cassatt is painting Spanish Dancer wearing a lace mantilla. The audience sees a woman who is wearing a hair covering that loosely drapes over her hair and down into her shoulders. Her body is facing the viewer, and her head is slightly tilted to the left side as she holds an open fan. The background is completely blacked out, and the viewer is left to focus on the woman alone. In regard to form and style, Cassatt would be inspired by none other than Spanish artist Bartolomé Murillo, whose paintings she encountered in Spain. Murillo's Two Women at a Window depicts exactly what the title entails. The artist paints these two women in a naturalistic style as they look directly out at the viewer, engaging the audience. Similar to the Spanish artist's work, Cassatt is subtly experimenting with the positioning and facial expression of this dancer. With a tilted head and a blank yet curious expression, Cassatt is communicating this woman as the person society sees her to be, a performer. Both of these works also depict women. However, it is important to keep in mind that Cassatt had not yet begun her specialization in the subject matter of women. Knowing her artistic focal point had not yet been matured, what can we infer about this piece? It can be assumed that this work is more about the culture of Spain as a whole and less about the actual sitter, perhaps more about the exotic female performer than the authentic female person herself. The idea that Cassatt is depicting the exotic other can be further argued through the artist's use of iconography. There are not many symbols depicted in this work, but one immediately recognized is the traditional Spanish fan. There's many reasons why Cassatt would have chosen to depict this woman holding a fan, the simplest being that she already had the fan with her. Nonetheless, this small piece within the work still holds significance and would even be used by Cassatt throughout the rest of her career. In a way, it is this object that adds another layer of separation between the viewer and the sitter. It would be one thing to hold a closed fan by her side, yet instead the woman decides, or is posed, to hold up an open fan at elbow's length, along with her other arm wrapped around her stomach. This fan and positioning of her arms communicates a distance, reservation, and even a guarding of herself, most likely against the grave outcomes that are inevitable with this woman's position as a performer. Subtly, it is as if Cassatt is dipping her toes in the depiction of the deeper feelings and experiences of a woman during this time, even if this woman is regarded as the exotic other. While Cassatt might be on the cusp of showing the depths of the female experience, it can be seen that in this beginning stage of her career, her views of womanhood and femininity are still elementary. She conforms to the art she encountered in Spain, which was largely from the male's perspective of the female. However, as time goes on, there is a noticeable shift in Cassatt's work that is evidence for a deeper acknowledgement of woman as person. Moving on 6 years later, from her trip to Spain, Cassatt would paint Woman with a Pearl Necklace in a Loge in 1879. This painting is considered her most distinguished work at the peak of her career in the 1870s and 80s. Not only that, but this piece was a part of Cassatt's debut exhibition at the Fourth Impressionist Exhibition in 1879. This would be the year that Cassatt undoubtedly begins to fine-tune her subject matter to that of women in the public and domestic spaces. The sitter for the work has often been regarded as Cassatt's sister Lydia. However, due to discrepancies with the age of Lydia and the appearance of the model, art historian Suzanne Lindsay more accurately describes the sitter as a friend of Cassatt's. Within this oil painting, Cassatt depicts a young woman seated in a loge, the private box seats of the newly constructed opera. The woman leans with her elbow on one arm of the bright red chair, her body facing the viewer, and yet her gaze is off to the right of the picture plane. She is wearing a pink frilly dress that has a low neckline, with the straps coming down off the shoulder around her arm. Cassatt takes careful observance of the newly electrified lighting and rendering of the setting. For example, her depiction of the young woman's hair is as if light was bouncing off the smooth strands. Not only does the artist show the effects of light and shadow on the form of the model, but she also includes the light source being a chandelier, which she depicts behind the young woman. Cassatt intends for the viewer to understand that it is only a reflection of what is in front of the woman due to a mirror directly behind the sitter. Thus, the mirror allows the viewer to see what the young woman sees. Using line and shadow, Cassatt depicts more box seating with this reflection and even goes to paint in forms of figures sitting down throughout the auditorium. Cassatt will go on to paint numerous pieces, with the setting being the Paris Opera. This is somewhat unusual for Cassatt to depict this public building as a woman's space due to the societal standards that the public settings of events and parties were typically the spheres of men. Even Robert Cassatt, the artist's father, spoke of the amount of controversy that broke out in response to a sketch his daughter had done of a woman in the loge of the opera, while writing to his son, Alexander. However, Cassatt is playing with spaces here by depicting the young woman in a privately seated area among a public theater. The setting also allowed the artist to depict modernity for the current time and culture. Like her contemporaries, Manet and Degas, she too would be able to depict the here and now and convey the world around her through her artistic eyes. With this newfound setting, the artist pays careful attention to how she depicts her sitters. This young woman is shown with a soft smile, looking to the right of the viewer, possibly acknowledging the look of someone else within the auditorium. Cassatt is showing the duality within this work of seeing and being seen, as this woman is not only here to watch and see the opera, but also to be seen and admired by those around her as an upper-class woman. Compared to Spanish dancer wearing a lace mantilla, Cassatt definitely depicts more life and exuberance in the later work, even within the differences and glances. On the one hand, the portrait of the Spanish dancer shows the woman looking directly out at the viewer, communicating her acknowledgement of the audience and anticipating her own perception. On the other hand, the woman seated at the Paris Opera seems to be not acknowledging or unaware of the viewer's presence and instead giving her attention elsewhere. In both works, Cassatt utilizes the iconography of the fan. Impressionist painters often use fans as an element of contemporary urban fashion, signaling modernity. The artist uses the fans in the same way, but with a great purpose and attention to detail. While the Spanish dancer holds the fan open in front of her, the young opera attendee holds the fan closed in her lap. Similarly, the earlier work of the artist does not even bother with showing a setting or background scene, yet by depicting the setting in a more active pose and expression of the sitter, Cassatt is placing woman within the current context of society and culture. Just in the comparison of these two works, it is extremely evident that Cassatt's views and understanding of womanhood are changing, as she sees the significant personality and character that women play within society. Around a decade later, Cassatt would begin experimenting with the medium of printmaking. Throughout her career, Cassatt would push herself as an artist, while also testing the limits and risks, not just in craft, but also in subject matter. Woman Bathing, created from 1890 to 1891, is a part of a collection of 10 prints Cassatt produced and exhibited at her first solo exhibition at Durand Ruel's gallery in Paris. This exhibition was in response to her exclusion of a French born-only show, where many of her Impressionist contemporaries got to exhibit. These prints were inspired by a recent Japanese art exhibition that Cassatt and Degas attended in 1890. Knowing this origin of influence, it is easy to look at this print and see the qualities of style and composition that were so key to Japanese prints, like the flat areas of color and the use of outline and pattern. The subject of Woman Bathing is a woman bent over a water basin at a vanity. Having her dress pulled down to her waist, this woman is gathering a handful of water to wash herself. The audience sees the front of the vanity and the back of the woman's body. Cassatt depicts the scene through simple line, shape, and pattern. She uses lines of perspective to indicate the form of the cabinet, the space of the room, and the top of the cabinet. However, her depiction of form stops at that. There is neither light nor shadow, which is most noticeably seen at the flat area of the color, representing the woman's back. Cassatt also plays with pattern by adding a striped design to the woman's dress and floral motifs to the floor of the room. Even though this print uses very minimal line and form, there is something to be said for being able to convey a whole space through simple lines. This shows Cassatt's artistic strength of the economy of line and form that even Degas spoke of and admired in her work. Not only does the medium of this print show Cassatt's willingness to experiment with her work, but the depiction of the female semi-nude also presents itself as a radical subject for Cassatt. In order to keep her respectability as an upper-class woman, Cassatt did have to limit her subject matter to women and children. While she is still only depicting a woman in this print, even the half nudity is revolutionary compared to anything she has done before. However, as art historian Griselda Pollock has shown, one way Cassatt was able to get around the stigma was the fact that this model is actually the artist's servant. It was her upper-class power that allowed Cassatt to ask for her servant to model half-dressed in the first place. Knowing this background information, the model of this work can be compared to Cassatt's model in Spanish Dancer wearing a lace mantilla. Both models are in similar situations of class and status, especially in their separation from Cassatt's upper-class status. However, Cassatt depicts these two women very differently. Looking at women with a pearl necklace and a loge as well, there is an evident progression of pose and gaze of each woman in these three pieces. In the first, the woman is staring directly out at the viewer with her body positioned toward the viewer. In the next, the woman is slightly positioned to the right, while her gaze is toward the right of the audience. Lastly, with the latest work, the woman has her body completely turned away from the viewer, and her eyes are set on the water in front of her, most likely unaware of the presence of the viewer. What does this progression say about Cassatt's view of woman and femininity? For one, this shift shows Cassatt's deepening understanding and appreciation for the modern woman. In Spanish Dancer wearing a lace mantilla, the woman's direct gaze and pose indicate that she is seen more so as a beautiful object and a thing to be admired than the woman she is. In the second painting, Woman with a Pearl Necklace in a Loge, the slight offset pose and glance of the woman shows more of her personality and curiosity for the environment around her. Yet still, her seated frontal position and exuberant facial expression communicates that she knows she is being observed and admired by others. To finish, Woman Bathing is very different from the previous two paintings in that its setting is private, domestic, and personal to the woman herself. Because her body and gaze are turned away from the viewer, this image really does capture a truthful woman. It is not as if she is performing for an audience or the subject to the public's eyes, but she is doing the most mundane everyday activity, and yet it is this activity and setting that allows her to strip down the facade, literally, and genuinely be herself. Ultimately, Cassatt's servant would have known the artist was drawing her, which means she would have understood that she was subject to another's gaze. The title for this work is also referred to as La Toilette. Here's a painting by Francois Boucher called The Toilette of Venus with this same subject. The toilette theme, which depicts the subject of a woman dressing or bathing, is often depicted by male artists with a woman in the privacy of her own bedroom. These women are often conveyed as over-sexualized and sensualized images compared to the reality of what women would actually look like dressing. Art historian Susan Filonier and others similarly argue that Cassatt's sitter is enormously sensuous with her visible bare back. However, I highly disagree and doubt that this was Cassatt's intent. Instead, I propose that Cassatt was showing this half-nude figure not to sensuously please the audience, but to communicate the humanity and reality of being a true woman. Cassatt is not idealizing this woman or posing her in a way that is flirtatious, but showing the sincerity and honesty of a woman's everyday life. Overall, Mary Cassatt, throughout her artistic career, found her subject matter to be primarily woman. However, looking over time at her depiction of women, there is a clear progression in her understanding of what makes a true woman, starting with her depiction of the exotic Spanish dancer in her travels to Spain. It is seen that through formal elements, iconography, and the pose of the subject, there is a separation between the audience and the sitter. Although she is looking directly at the viewer, she is distant to true reality and instead subject to the idealized performance of her work. In the second painting, Cassatt shows a modern woman in her time and setting of the Paris Opera, yet still she is posed in a way that communicates her longing to be seen and admired by those around her. Finally, Cassatt arrives at her print of a woman bathing in the privacy of her home, and it is in this work that the artist reveals a true woman. This woman is not looking to impress anyone or to be admired by those around her. She is simply being herself, honest, unidealized, and true. Thank you.